The grand hall of the Empire stretched before Sergeant Daniel Cole like nothing he had ever seen on Earth. Crystal pillars rose toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the stars themselves, and thousands of alien faces watched him from every direction. He kept his back straight and his expression calm, just as his training had taught him. He was here to represent humanity, and he would not let his people down. Ambassador walked beside him, her diplomatic robes flowing with each step. She leaned close and whispered that he needed to remember everything they had discussed. The selection ceremony was ancient and sacred to the. Whatever happened, he must not show fear or hesitation. Daniel nodded slightly. He had fought in 3 wars and faced enemies that would give most people nightmares. But this was different. This was not about weapons or tactics. This was about forging an alliance that could determine humanity's future among the stars. Emperor sat upon a throne made of black crystal, his 4 eyes watching Daniel with an expression that was impossible to read. They were tall and slender, with skin that shifted colors based on their emotions. The Emperor's skin remained a steady deep purple, the color of authority and control. The ceremony was explained to Daniel by a court official, whose voice echoed through the massive hall. The human representative would choose one of the 7 imperial princesses to form a diplomatic bond. This bond would symbolize the alliance between Earth and the Empire. It was an honor that had never been offered to such a young species before. Daniel understood what was really happening. They were testing humanity. They wanted to see if humans could navigate their complex political waters. A wise choice would earn respect. A foolish choice would mark humans as simple creatures unworthy of true partnership. The 7 princesses stepped forward one by one, and Daniel watched carefully as each presented herself. Princess came first, the eldest and most favored. Her skin glowed with brilliant gold, and jewels covered every part of her elegant clothing. She spoke of her accomplishments, her command of 3 fleet armadas, her mastery of 17 languages. She looked at Daniel the way someone might look at a useful tool. The second princess spoke of her wealth and the planets she controlled. The third boasted of her beauty and the princes from other empires who had begged for her hand. The fourth, fifth, and sixth each tried to outdo their sisters with displays of power and prestige. Daniel listened to all of them, but his attention kept drifting to the 7th princess. She stood apart from her sisters, smaller and quieter. Her skin was pale gray, and her markings were faded in a way that seemed to make the other uncomfortable. She wore simple clothing without jewels or decoration. She did not speak of accomplishments or power. She simply stood there, watching Daniel with large silver eyes that held something her sisters lacked. Curiosity, genuine curiosity about him as a person. Ambassador touched his arm gently. She reminded him that Princess was the politically smart choice. An alliance with the eldest princess would give humanity powerful backing in the Galactic Accord. Daniel knew she was right. Every logical part of his brain told him to walk toward and bow before her. It was what everyone expected. It was what would make his mission a clear success. But Daniel had not survived 3 wars by ignoring his instincts. He stepped forward and the hall fell completely silent. Thousands of eyes followed him as he walked past Princess. The eldest princess's skin flickered with surprise and then anger, though she quickly controlled it. He walked past the 2nd princess, then the 3rd, then all the others. He stopped in front of Princess. She looked up at him with those silver eyes, and for a moment he saw something that broke his heart. She was bracing herself for rejection. She expected him to walk past her too, just as everyone else always had. Daniel bowed deeply, the formal bow of respect that Ambassador had taught him. He spoke clearly so that everyone in the hall could hear him. He said that he chose Princess of the Empire to be his bonded partner in alliance. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the whispers began. They spread through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Daniel heard words he did not understand, but the tone was clear. Shock, disbelief, some amusement, and underneath it all, anger from those who had expected him to choose differently. Emperor rose from his throne. His skin had shifted to a darker shade, and his 4 eyes narrowed as he looked at Daniel. For a long moment, Daniel thought the emperor might reject the choice entirely. But tradition bound even emperors, declared that the selection had been made according to the ancient ways. The bond between the human representative and princess was recognized by the throne. His voice was cold, and his displeasure was obvious to everyone present. Princess' skin burned red for just a moment before she controlled herself and turned away. Daniel noticed several others watching him with expressions that promised trouble ahead. Ambassador looked worried, but she maintained her diplomatic smile as she congratulated him on completing the ceremony. The crowd began to disperse, and servants led Daniel into a private chamber where they could speak. It was the first time Daniel had been alone with the princess he had chosen. Stood by a window that looked out over the alien city below. Her skin had shifted to a soft blue, and Daniel had learned enough about colors to know that blue meant uncertainty. She spoke without turning around. Her voice was quiet but steady. She asked him why he had chosen her. She said that he must know what she was. She was the Eclipse-born, the Shadow daughter, the princess that brought shame to her family. Choosing her would gain him nothing. It would only make enemies. Daniel walked to stand beside her. He looked out at the strange city with its impossible architecture and its ships flying between towers. He told her the truth. He said that he chose her because she was the only one who looked at him like he was a person. Her sisters saw a political opportunity. Their father saw a test for a primitive species. The court saw entertainment, but she looked at him with curiosity and kindness. He said that where he came from, that mattered more than power or wealth. Finally turned to face him. Her silver eyes were bright with an emotion he could not name. She said that he was either the human she had ever met or the most foolish. Daniel smiled and said that he had been called both many times. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that did not exist on Earth. Somewhere in the palace, powerful people were already plotting against the unexpected choice that had been made. But in that quiet room, a human soldier and an outcast princess had begun something that would change everything. The weeks following the selection ceremony were unlike anything Daniel had expected. He had prepared himself for political meetings, formal dinners, and endless negotiations. Instead, he found himself spending most of his time in the quiet wing of the palace that belonged to Princess. Her quarters were modest compared to what he had seen of her sister's domains, where had entire floors decorated with treasures from 100 worlds, had a simple set of rooms with plain walls and basic furniture. The only remarkable thing was the books. Thousands of them filled every shelf and covered every surface. Daniel picked up one of the books during his first visit. He could not read the script, but explained that it was a history of diplomatic relations between the major powers of the galaxy. She had taught herself to read 12 different languages just from these books. He asked her why she had spent so much time studying when everyone treated her as if she did not matter. Skin flickered with several colors before settling on a calm green. She told him that being invisible had its advantages. No one watched what she did or cared what she learned. While her sisters were trained in politics and warfare, she was left alone. So she educated herself. She read everything she could find about the galaxy, its peoples, its conflicts, and its possibilities. She smiled sadly and added that she had always known her knowledge would never be used, but learning made her feel less alone. Daniel felt something shift in his chest. He recognized that feeling. He had grown up poor on Earth, in a small town where no one expected anything from him. He had joined the military because it was his only way out. He understood what it meant to be dismissed and overlooked. Over the following days, they talked for hours. Daniel told her about Earth, about its blue oceans and green forests, about its long history of wars and its slow journey toward peace. He told her about human concepts that fascinated her: democracy, where leaders were chosen by ordinary people; individual rights, where every person had value regardless of birth; the idea that someone could rise from nothing to become something great. Listened with wonder in her silver eyes. She said that society was built on blood and birth. Your family determined your worth. Your place in the order was fixed from the moment you were born. The idea that worth could be earned was strange and beautiful to her. Daniel asked about the eclipse and why it had marked her so badly. Skin turned gray, the color of deep sadness. She explained that in belief, children born during an eclipse carried the shadow with them. They were considered unlucky, touched by darkness. Her mother had died giving birth to her, which only confirmed what everyone believed. She was a curse on her family. Her father had never been cruel to her. He had simply acted as if she did not exist. Her sisters had learned to do the same. For 30 cycles, she had lived in the shadow of a palace that should have been her home. Daniel reached out and touched her hand gently. He told her that where he came from, people did not believe in such things. A person was not defined by when they were born. They were defined by what they chose to do with their life. Looked at their joined hands with an expression of surprise. Physical contact was rare and meaningful in culture. Daniel had not known this, but he did not pull away. Their quiet days were interrupted when Princess requested a private meeting with Daniel. Ambassador advised him to go. Refusing would be a political insult. Received him in a chamber filled with gold and light. Her skin glowed with confidence as she welcomed him. She spoke smoothly about the unfortunate situation he found himself in. She said that everyone understood that humans were new to galactic politics. Mistakes were expected. Daniel kept his expression neutral and asked what mistake she was referring to. Smile did not waver. She said that choosing had been a charming gesture, but surely he understood that it served no practical purpose. She offered him a solution. The bond could be quietly transferred to her through an old legal process. No one would think less of him. In fact, he would be praised for recognizing his error and correcting it. Daniel looked at the eldest princess with her perfect skin and her careful words. He saw the calculation behind her eyes, the hunger for whatever advantage the human alliance might bring. He thanked her for the offer and declined. Skin flickered red before she controlled it. She warned him that he was making powerful enemies. She said that some people in the court believed humans were too primitive to be trusted with real alliances. His choice had given those people evidence to support their beliefs. Daniel told her that he would take his chances. He returned to his quarters and found her waiting anxiously. She had heard about the meeting and feared what might have said or done. Daniel assured her that everything was fine. That night someone tried to kill. Daniel was sleeping in a small room connected to her chambers when he heard the sound of breaking glass. He moved on instinct, grabbing the weapon he kept hidden and rushing toward her room. 3 figures in dark clothing stood over his bed. One of them held a blade that glowed with energy, was awake and pressed against the wall, her skin flashing white with terror. Daniel did not hesitate. His military training took over completely. He moved through the darkness like a ghost, striking the first assassin before they even knew he was there. The second turned to face him and received a blow that sent them crashing to the floor. The third tried to run, but Daniel caught them before they reached the window. Within moments, all 3 assassins were unconscious on the floor. Stared at him with wide eyes. Her skin slowly shifted from white to pale blue. She asked how he had done that. She had never seen anyone move so fast. Daniel checked the assassins to make sure they were secure. He told her that humans might be new to the galaxy, but they had been fighting wars since the beginning of their history. Combat was something they understood very well. He looked at her with fierce determination in his eyes. He promised that no one would hurt her. As long as he was alive, he would protect her. Skin shifted to a soft pink that Daniel had not seen before. She did not explain what the color meant, but she moved closer to him and stayed by his side for the rest of the night. The next morning, the investigation began. The assassins refused to speak, but their equipment was traced to suppliers connected to the military. Someone powerful had sent them, someone who wanted dead. Ambassador expressed concern about the political complications, but she trusted Daniel to handle the situation. Daniel stood in his chambers and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, enemies were planning their next move. The selection had been only the beginning. Everything was about to become much more dangerous. The investigation into the assassination attempt led Daniel and through the darkest corners of the empire. They moved carefully, trusting no one except Ambassador and a handful of servants who had served since childhood. Daniel used every skill he had learned in military intelligence. He tracked supply chains, questioned contacts, and pieced together fragments of information that others had overlooked. The assassins had been professionals, trained and equipped with weapons that were not available on the open market. Someone with significant resources had sent them. Proved to be far more helpful than Daniel had expected. Her years of being ignored had taught her how to be invisible when she needed to be. Servants spoke freely around her, assuming she was too unimportant to matter. Court officials discussed sensitive matters without lowering their voices when she passed by. She heard things that would have been hidden from anyone else. Together, they began to uncover a conspiracy that reached far deeper than a simple assassination attempt. The trail led them to General, one of the most respected military commanders in the empire. Daniel observed him from a distance during a formal dinner, watching as he exchanged meaningful glances with Princess. Their communication was subtle, but Daniel recognized the signs. These two were working together. After the dinner, managed to slip into a private corridor where servants gathered to gossip. She returned to Daniel with troubling news. The servants had whispered about troop movements in the outer territories. Ships were being repositioned without the Emperor's knowledge. Something big was being planned. Daniel contacted Ambassador through a secure channel. He told her that he believed a coup was being organized. He did not yet know when it would happen, but the pieces were falling into place. His response was measured but serious. She said that she would quietly alert Earth and prepare for the worst. In the meantime, Daniel needed to gather more evidence. Without proof, any accusation would be dismissed as human paranoia. The search for evidence led Daniel to the ancient archives beneath the palace. New secret passages that had been forgotten for generations. She had explored them as a lonely child, and now that knowledge proved invaluable. In the dusty depths of the archives, they found records that had been hidden away for centuries. Daniel could not read them, but translated slowly, her voice growing more troubled with each passage. The records spoke of an ancient prophecy. Long before the current dynasty, a seer had predicted that a shadow-born princess would one day determine the fate of the empire. She would either bring about its greatest glory or its complete destruction. The prophecy had been suppressed by later rulers who feared its implications. His hands trembled as she finished reading. She understood now why she had been treated as cursed her entire life. The royal family knew about the prophecy. They had feared her from the moment she was born. Daniel put his hand on her shoulder. He told her that prophecies were just words. What mattered was the choices people made. She was not cursed, and she was not destined for destruction. She was simply a person who had been treated badly and deserved better. Looked at him with those silver eyes that had first caught his attention. Her skin shifted to that soft pink color again, and this time she explained what it meant. Pink was the color of affection, of warmth, of growing love. Daniel felt his heart respond in ways he had not anticipated. He had come to as a soldier on a diplomatic mission. He had not expected to find someone who understood him, who saw past his uniform and his duty to the person underneath. They were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor above. Someone had followed them. Daniel moved quickly, pulling into a hidden alcove as a group of soldiers marched past their position. These were not regular palace guards. Their uniforms bore the marks of general, personal forces. The soldiers were searching for something or someone. Daniel and waited in silence until the soldiers moved on. Then they made their way through the secret passages back to a safe location. The conspiracy was accelerating. Their investigation had been noticed. That night received a message from an unexpected source. One of servants had approached his old nursemaid with information. The servant was tired of serving a cruel mistress and wanted to help. The information confirmed their worst fears. The coup was planned for the coming sunrise. Generals' forces would seize the palace while allies neutralized the emperor's loyal guards. The emperor himself would be captured and forced to abdicate in favor of, and humanity would be blamed for the entire thing. Evidence had been fabricated showing that humans had secretly sabotaged systems and assassinated key officials. Once the coup succeeded, the new government would expel humanity from the Galactic Accord and rally other species against Earth. Daniel understood the terrible elegance of the plan, would gain power, and humanity would be destroyed. Two problems solved with one strike. Ambassador needed to be warned immediately. Daniel used his secure channel to send an urgent message explaining everything they had discovered. Responded that she would try to get a human ship into position to help, but time was short. Before they could plan their next move, soldiers found them. The soldiers burst into the room with weapons drawn. Daniel fought, taking down 3 of them before he was overwhelmed by numbers. Tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. They were both captured and bound. General himself came to inspect the prisoners. He was tall even for with skin that stayed cold blue regardless of the situation. He looked at Daniel with something like respect. Said that he had heard humans were fierce warriors. It seemed the rumors were true, but even the fiercest warrior could not fight an entire army. He ordered them taken to the fortress outside the city where the coup would be launched. Wanted to deal with them personally. As Daniel was dragged through the palace corridors, he saw servants and guards who quickly looked away. The conspiracy had supporters everywhere. The emperor's own household had been infiltrated. Was waiting for them at the fortress. Her skin glowed gold with triumph as she watched the prisoners brought before her. She said that it was almost sad how predictable the human had been. Choosing the Shadow Princess, investigating the assassination, stumbling into secrets that should have remained buried. She walked closer to and looked down at her youngest sister with contempt. She said that the prophecy would never be fulfilled now. The Shadowborn princess would die, and the empire would be safe under proper leadership. Skin flashed with anger for the first time Daniel had ever seen. She told that she was making a terrible mistake. Humans were not the weak species they believed them to be. Laughed and said that one soldier could not stop an empire from falling. Daniel met her eyes with calm determination. He told her that she clearly did not know much about humans. Dismissed them with a wave of her hand. She ordered them locked in separate cells until dawn, when the coup would begin and their fates would be decided. As Daniel was led away, he caught eye one last time. He tried to communicate everything he could not say aloud. Hope, determination, a promise that this was not over. The cell door closed behind him, and the long night began. Outside the fortress walls, the sun sank below the horizon. In a few hours, everything would change. The question was whether Daniel could find a way to change it in humanity's favor. Daniel sat in darkness and waited. They had taken his weapons and bound his hands with energy restraints. They had placed him in a cell designed for their own kind, built to contain beings much larger and stronger than a human. That was their first mistake. The restraints were sized for wrists, which were thicker than human wrists. Daniel had been working at them since the moment the guards left. His hands were bleeding from the effort, but pain was something he had learned to ignore long ago. After 2 hours, his right hand slipped free. The left followed moments later. The cell door was locked with a sophisticated electronic system, but it also had a physical component that could be accessed from inside. They had not considered that a prisoner might actually escape the restraints. Daniel used a small metal piece from his boot, hidden in a compartment that the guards had not found, to manipulate the lock mechanism. The door clicked open, and Daniel stepped into the corridor. He moved like a shadow through the fortress, using every skill his training had given him. They were confident in their security. Guards patrolled in predictable patterns, and surveillance systems had blind spots that no one had bothered to fix. Daniel exploited every weakness. He found cell 3 levels below his own. She was sitting in the corner, her skin pale gray with despair. When the door opened and she saw Daniel standing there, her skin flashed through a dozen colors before settling on bright white. She whispered that she could not believe he had escaped. She asked how it was possible. Daniel smiled and told her that humans were full of surprises. He asked if she could walk. Stood and showed him her own hands. The restraints hung loose from one wrist. She said that she had been working on them too. Being underestimated her whole life had taught her to be resourceful. Daniel felt a surge of pride and something deeper. She was stronger than anyone had given her credit for. Together, they might actually have a chance. They made their way through the fortress, avoiding patrols and hiding in storage rooms when necessary. New architecture better than Daniel, and she guided them toward the communications center. If they could broadcast evidence of the conspiracy, the coup might be stopped before it began. The communications center was guarded by 6 soldiers. Daniel assessed the situation quickly. Direct assault would be too loud and too risky. They needed another approach. Pointed to a ventilation shaft above them. She said it connected to the room behind the communications center. She was small enough to fit through it. Daniel did not like the idea of separating, but he trusted her judgment. He told her to get inside and prepare the broadcast system. He would create a distraction. Squeezed through the ventilation shaft while Daniel circled around to the main corridor. He waited until she signaled that she was in position, then he walked directly toward the guards. The soldiers were shocked to see a human prisoner strolling toward them. They raised their weapons and demanded to know how he had escaped. Daniel raised his empty hands and said that he wanted to surrender. He said that he had information about other human spies in the palace. He would tell them everything if they would take him to General. The guards hesitated. This was clearly a trick, but the mention of other spies made them uncertain. While they debated what to do, was working at the communication controls behind them. One guard moved forward to restrain Daniel. That was when Daniel struck. The fight was brutal and quick. Humans were smaller than, but they were also faster and more agile. Daniel used the tight corridor to his advantage, preventing the soldiers from using their superior numbers effectively. He fought with everything he had, breaking bones and disabling opponents with precise strikes. By the time the last guard fell, had activated the broadcast system. She uploaded the evidence they had gathered, records of the conspiracy, communications between, and proof that the accusations against humanity were fabricated. The broadcast went out to every screen in the empire. Millions saw Princess speaking to her co-conspirators about overthrowing her own father. They heard her mocking humans as primitive creatures who would be easy to blame. They watched General discussing how the emperor would be imprisoned and humiliated. The reaction was immediate. Across the capital city, citizens who had been prepared to accept the coup now rose up in anger, had miscalculated badly. The people valued loyalty and honor above all else. Seeing their princess betray her own blood turned public opinion against her. Inside the fortress, chaos erupted. Soldiers who had been loyal began to doubt their orders. Some tried to flee, while others turned on their commanders. Daniel grabbed hand and led her through the confusion toward the exit. They were almost free when General himself blocked their path. The general's skin was dark red with fury. He had a weapon in his hand, and he pointed it directly at. He said that if he could not have the empire, he would at least ensure that the prophecy was never fulfilled. Daniel moved without thinking. He threw himself between, and just as the weapon fired, the energy blast hit his shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. Screamed and fell to her knees beside him. Her skin flashed pure white, then shifted to a deep crimson that Daniel had never seen before. It was the color of rage. She rose and faced with an expression that made the general step back. She spoke in a voice that carried power and command. She told him that he had made a terrible mistake. She was the Shadowborn, the one the prophecy spoke of, and she chose to save this empire, not destroy it. Something in her voice made hesitate. In that moment, loyalist guards burst into the corridor. They had fought their way through the fortress after seeing the broadcast. Emperor himself was with them. The Emperor looked at the wounded human, then at his youngest daughter standing protectively over him. His expression was complicated, filled with emotions that Daniel could not read. Was seized by the guards and dragged away, still shouting that the prophecy would doom them all. Knelt beside Daniel again, pressing her hands against his wound. She begged him to stay with her. She said that he could not die, not after everything they had survived together. Daniel managed a weak smile. He told her that humans were harder to kill than she might think. Outside the fortress, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. The coup had failed, but the sun was also revealing something else in the sky. A human ship, the Starlight Dawn, was descending through the atmosphere. Ambassador had gotten the message. Earth had sent help. The sight of humans coming to defend the empire rather than exploit its weakness changed something fundamental. Citizens gathered in the streets, looking up at the ship with new understanding. These strange beings from a small blue planet had risked everything to protect people who were not their own. Daniel was carried to safety as medical teams rushed to treat his wound, refused to leave his side. Her skin had settled into that soft pink color, and she held his hand tightly. The battle was over, but for Daniel and for Earth and the Empire, something entirely new was just beginning. 1 week after the failed coup, the great throne room of the Empire was filled with more beings than it had ever held before. Representatives from every major species in the Galactic Accord had traveled to witness what would happen next. The events on had sent shockwaves through the entire galaxy. Daniel stood near the front of the chamber, his shoulder still bandaged but healing well. Medicine was advanced, and the doctors had been impressed by how quickly his body recovered. They said that humans possessed a remarkable ability to heal from injuries that would have crippled other species. Ambassador stood beside him, dressed in her finest diplomatic robes. She looked at Daniel with pride in her eyes. She had received messages from Earth's leaders expressing their gratitude. What Daniel had done had elevated humanity's standing among the stars more than decades of diplomacy could have achieved. Was not in the crowd. She had been taken to prepare for the ceremony, and Daniel had not seen her since the previous night. He missed her presence beside him more than he wanted to admit. Emperor entered the throne room, and every being present fell silent. The Emperor walked slowly to his throne, his skin a deep purple that showed nothing of his inner thoughts. He sat and looked out over the assembled crowd with his 4 ancient eyes. He spoke first of the conspiracy. Princess and general had been found guilty of treason by the imperial court. Their punishment would be exile to a barren moon at the edge of space. They would live out their days in isolation, stripped of all rank and privilege. It was a fate that many considered worse than death. The representatives murmured their approval. Justice had been served. Then the Emperor spoke of something more personal. He admitted before the entire galaxy that he had failed as a father. He had allowed superstition and ancient fears to guide his treatment of his youngest daughter. He had ignored her, dismissed her, and left her to suffer alone in a palace that should have been her home. Daniel watched the Emperor's skin shift to pale gray as he spoke. It was the first time he had seen the ruler show vulnerability. The Emperor said that the prophecy had spoken of a shadow-born princess who would determine the fate of the empire. He had feared those words his entire reign. He had believed that keeping weak and isolated would prevent the prophecy from coming true. He had been wrong. The great doors at the back of the throne room opened and entered. She was dressed in robes of deep black and silver, the colors of the eclipse that had marked her birth. But she wore them like armor, not like shame. Her skin glowed with soft gold, and she walked with the confidence of someone who had finally found her place. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with appearance. She was beautiful because she was strong, because she had survived, because she had chosen hope over despair. Walked the length of the throne room and stopped before her father. The Emperor rose from his throne and descended the steps to stand face to face with her. He announced to the assembled representatives that the prophecy had been fulfilled. The Shadowborn princess had saved the empire from destruction. She had uncovered the conspiracy, broadcast the truth, and the people against those who would have destroyed them. And she had not done it alone. The Emperor turned his gaze to Daniel. He said that a human soldier had stood beside his daughter when no one else would. This human had chosen to see value in someone the entire empire had dismissed. He had protected her, fought for her, and nearly died for her. Emperor declared that Princess would be named his heir. She would be the first youngest child to inherit the throne in all of history. The rules that had governed succession for thousands of years were being changed because of what she had proven. The throne room erupted in reaction. Some cheered, some protested, but most simply stared in disbelief. The Shadow Princess would one day rule the empire. But the Emperor was not finished. He turned to Daniel and offered him an honor that had never been given to any non in recorded history. He asked Daniel to serve as the first human member of the Imperial Guard, the elite protectors of the throne itself. Daniel felt the weight of countless eyes upon him. He looked at Ambassador, who nodded slightly. He looked at the representatives from other species, many of whom seemed shocked by the offer. And he looked at, whose silver eyes were bright with hope. He accepted. The ceremony continued with formal declarations and ancient rituals that Daniel barely understood. But through it all, his attention kept returning to. She had become everything her family had feared and everything they had failed to see. She was not a curse. She was a gift that they had been too blind to recognize. When the ceremony finally ended, stepped forward to address the assembled representatives. Her voice was clear and strong, reaching every corner of the massive chamber. She spoke of a new era for the Empire and for the Galactic Accord. She said that the old ways of judging worth by birth and blood were ending. The future would be built on trust, on cooperation, on the recognition that every being had value regardless of where they came from. She looked directly at Daniel as she continued. She said that humans had taught her something precious. They had shown her that an alliance could be more than politics. It could be a genuine partnership between equals who chose to stand together. She announced that the bond formed during the selection ceremony would continue, not as a diplomatic arrangement, but as a true partnership that she entered freely and gladly. The representatives from other species began to whisper among themselves. Daniel caught fragments of their conversations. Many were expressing curiosity about humans, about these strange beings who chose the overlooked, protected the powerless, and earned respect through their actions rather than their technology. Ambassador leaned close to Daniel. She told him quietly that requests were already arriving from other species who wanted human representatives of their own. What had begun as one soldier's unexpected choice was changing how the entire galaxy viewed humanity. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the throne room had grown quiet, Daniel found on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in those impossible alien colors that he had come to love. She turned as he approached, and her skin shifted to that soft pink that meant so much. She said that everything had changed, just as the prophecy predicted, but not in the way anyone had expected. Daniel stood beside her and looked out at the city that would one day be hers to rule. He said that prophecies were tricky things. They never seemed to mean what people thought they meant. Smiled and moved closer to him. She asked what would happen now. They had started as strangers thrown together by an ancient ritual. They had become allies, then friends, then something more. What did the future hold for a human soldier and a princess? Daniel took her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her alien skin against his own. He told her honestly that he did not know, but he said that he had learned something important during his time on. The future was not written by prophecies or traditions. It was written by the choices people made every day. He had chosen her in that grand hall weeks ago. He would choose her again now. Skin glowed brighter, and she leaned against him as they watched the sun disappear below the horizon. Behind them, the Empire was changing. Around them, the galaxy was watching. Ahead of them, challenges and possibilities stretched out like stars. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was that they had found each other, two unlikely souls from different worlds who had chosen to face the future together. And that, Daniel thought, was the most human thing of all.